Over the past several years, a theory has been spreading across social media that goes something like this. Antarctica is not simply a continent. It is a wall, a massive ring of ice hundreds of feet tall, encircling the edge of a flat disk we call Earth. And the only reason you have never seen it is that governments actively prevent ordinary people from getting close to it. Videos making this claim regularly reach millions of views. Comment sections fill with people asking, genuinely, why nobody is allowed to just go and look? Why the continent seems more restricted than anywhere else on the planet? I want to take those questions seriously because underneath a theory I do not believe, there are real facts. Antarctica genuinely is one of the most restricted, least visited land masses on Earth. There genuinely are enormous walls of ice at its edge, over 100 feet tall in places, stretching for hundreds of miles. And there genuinely is a treaty signed by world governments that controls who can go there and what they can do once they arrive. None of that is a cover story. All of it is true. I just do not think it means what the theory claims it means. So that is what this documentary is actually about. Not debunking a claim you have probably already heard. That is not interesting on its own. I want to walk through what is actually happening at the edge of Antarctica. Why it looks the way it does, why access really is restricted, and what scientists have found there that is genuinely stranger than the wall people are looking for. Stay with me, because the real answer took me somewhere I did not expect. Let us start with scale, because almost none of this makes sense until you understand how large this place actually is. Antarctica covers approximately 14 million square kilometers. Larger than the United States and Mexico combined, nearly twice the size of Australia. If you took the entire continent of Europe and set it down on top of Antarctica, you would still have room left over around the edges. Almost the entire surface is covered by ice, averaging close to 2 kilometers thick, exceeding 4 kilometers in some locations, roughly the elevation of some of the taller Rocky Mountain peaks. Except here, it is solid ice, compressed under its own weight over hundreds of thousands of years. This ice sheet holds around 70% of the entire planet's fresh water, sitting frozen on one continent, most of it in a place fewer than a few thousand human beings occupy at any given time. Now, here is where the population number becomes important, because it is central to why this theory took hold the way it did. There is no permanent civilian population on Antarctica. No cities, no towns, no residents in the way every other continent has residents. What exists instead is a rotating population of scientists and support staff at research stations, operated by roughly 30 different countries, numbering somewhere around 1,000 people during the deep winter months, and closer to 5,000 during the more accessible summer season. Compare that to literally anywhere else on Earth. Compare it to the population of a single mid-sized city. This is a landmass larger than Europe, with a year-round population smaller than a college campus. Of course, the vast majority of humanity has never been there and never will. Not because anyone is being kept out, because there is genuinely almost nothing there for an ordinary person to go and do, and the conditions required to survive even a short visit are extreme enough that tourism, while it does exist, remains tightly limited and expensive. Civilian tourism to Antarctica is real and not secret. Roughly 100,000 people visit as tourists in a typical year, almost entirely by ship, to the Antarctic Peninsula. What stops most people from going is not a barrier erected by any government. It is distance, cost, and logistics. Getting into the deep interior is a different matter, and this is where real restriction applies. Interior stations require aircraft capable of landing on snow runways, cold weather training, and coordination with the national program running that station. A private citizen cannot simply walk in. But scientists from dozens of nations do exactly that routinely, under a system every signatory government agreed to and continues to fund. So, why is it regulated the way it is? This is where the Antarctic Treaty comes in, and I think the actual history of this document is more interesting than most people realize. In 1959, 12 countries signed the Antarctic Treaty, and that number has since grown to 56. The signing came during the height of the Cold War, and several original signatories, including the United States and the Soviet Union, were at that exact time locked in open rivalry almost everywhere else on the planet. Getting those governments to agree in writing to demilitarize an entire continent was a genuine diplomatic achievement. The treaty itself does several specific things. It designates Antarctica for peaceful purposes only, banning military activity, weapons testing, and military bases. It freezes all existing territorial claims rather than resolving them. It guarantees freedom of scientific investigation and requires research results be shared openly between signatory nations. And it prohibits nuclear testing and radioactive waste disposal on the continent. This is not a document designed to hide something from the public. If anything, it is the opposite, one of the only international agreements that mandates scientific transparency across competing nations that otherwise share very little with each other. Access is restricted, yes, but it is restricted the way access to a remote, extremely dangerous, ecologically fragile research zone would naturally be restricted under a legal framework that every major government on Earth had to formally agree to and continues to operate under in full view of every other signatory. Consider a few actual research stations because details matter more than the abstract idea of a treaty. McMurdo Station, operated by the United States, is the largest on the continent, supporting over 1,000 people at peak summer. Concordia Station, jointly run by France and Italy, sits deep in the interior, staffed year-round by a small crew studying astronomy and glaciology. Russia continues to operate Vostok Station, directly above the lake of the same name, where temperatures as low as -89 degrees Celsius were recorded in 1983, among the coldest ever measured on Earth's surface. None of these stations are hidden from each other. Researchers publish papers together across national lines and share logistical support when emergencies arise, because in an environment this hostile, cooperation is closer to a survival requirement than a courtesy. Now, let us talk about the ice itself, because I think this is genuinely where the theory's visual evidence comes from, even if the conclusion drawn from it is wrong. Around significant portions of Antarctica's coastline, where interior ice sheets flow outward and meet the sea, you find structures called ice shelves. The largest is the Ross Ice Shelf, roughly the size of France, a floating platform of ice extending onto the surface of the ocean. Where these shelves meet open water, they often terminate in sheer vertical cliffs. The ice front of the Ross Ice Shelf alone stretches approximately 600 kilometers, rising 15 to 50 meters above the waterline in places, with considerably more ice below the surface. 50 meters is roughly the height of a 15-story building, made entirely of compacted ice, running unbroken for hundreds of kilometers. If you approached Antarctica by sea in certain locations, this is genuinely what you would see: a sheer, towering wall of white and blue ice, extending farther than you could see in either direction, rising directly out of the ocean with no beach, no gradual slope, nothing resembling a coastline anywhere else on Earth. These shelves are not static either. Ice constantly flows outward from the interior under its own weight. And periodically, enormous sections break away in a process called calving. One iceberg that calved from the Ross Ice Shelf in the year 2000 was measured at close to 11,000 square kilometers, larger than the entire island of Jamaica. Photographs and footage of these calving events, and of the towering faces left behind, circulate constantly among researchers and, eventually, online. I think that is part of why the imagery feels so convincing to people encountering it without context. It is real footage of a genuinely enormous structure. It is simply footage of an ice shelf margin, not the edge of a disk. I think this is where the modern ice wall theory actually originates, whether or not the people spreading it are aware of the connection. These ice shelf cliffs are real. They are enormous. They are visually unlike almost anything else most people will ever see photographs of, and they genuinely do encircle significant portions of the continent's edge. The wall exists. It is made of frozen water rather than marking the edge of a flat disk, and it has been mapped, measured, and photographed by satellites and research expeditions for decades. But the physical structure people are describing is not invented. Are you still with me? Because I know a video correcting a fringe theory can start to feel like it is punching in a direction that does not matter. But stay with me, because what actual scientists have found underneath all of that ice is, to me, considerably stranger and more interesting than anything the wall theory proposes. Let us start with what is underneath the ice sheet itself, because for most of human history, we genuinely had no way of knowing. Using radar systems capable of penetrating kilometers of solid ice, scientists have spent decades mapping the actual bedrock surface of Antarctica, the landscape that exists beneath the frozen layer covering it. What they found reshaped how geologists think about the continent entirely. Buried beneath more than 600 kilometers of ice sheet in East Antarctica sits an entire mountain range, comparable in scale to the European Alps, that no human being has ever seen with their own eyes, and likely never will. It is called the Gamburtsev mountain range, first detected by a Soviet expedition in 1958, confirmed decades later through more advanced radar mapping. Peaks rise nearly 3,000 meters, sharp and jagged, buried under ice for millions of years, preserved almost perfectly because glacial ice actually protects the terrain beneath it from the erosion that wears down exposed mountains everywhere else. Radar systems mounted on aircraft, and more recently satellites, send pulses downward that pass through ice but reflect differently when they hit solid rock underneath. Essentially, the same way an ultrasound builds a picture of something solid inside soft tissue. A campaign called Operation Ice Bridge, run by NASA and partner institutions, spent years flying these routes over Antarctica, specifically to map bedrock hidden below. The range that emerged is not a blurry guess. It is measured, three-dimensional, verified through instruments rather than footsteps. What makes it stranger is that its existence created a real geological puzzle. Mountain ranges like the Alps form through tectonic plate collisions. The Gamburtsev Mountains sit in the middle of a single continental plate, far from any active boundary, and appear to be extremely old, potentially hundreds of millions of years old. Researchers still debate exactly how a range this large formed, with no obvious collision to explain it. An entire alpine mountain range, sitting directly beneath our feet on this continent, invisible, untouched, frozen in time, since before some of the largest evolutionary changes in Earth's history took place. And we are still not entirely certain how it got there. And that is not even the strangest thing radar mapping revealed. In 1996, using satellite altimetry and ground-penetrating radar collected over decades, scientists confirmed a massive body of liquid water sitting beneath nearly 4 kilometers of ice, where Soviet and later Russian researchers had been drilling since the 1970s. They named it Lake Vostok. It stretches roughly 250 kilometers in length, comparable to one of the larger lakes in North America, and has been completely sealed beneath the ice, isolated from sunlight and atmosphere for an estimated 15 to 25 million years. 15 to 25 million years. Let that sit for a moment. That isolation predates the existence of Homo sapiens by a margin so large it becomes difficult to hold in your head. It predates most of the modern mammal species alive today. Whatever exists in that water, if anything does, has been sealed away from the rest of the planet's biosphere since a period when the entire arrangement of life on Earth looked fundamentally different than it does now. The lake remains liquid, despite sitting beneath one of the coldest places on the planet's surface, for two specific reasons. The immense pressure of nearly 4 kilometers of ice pressing down on it lowers the freezing point of the water beneath, and geothermal heat rising from the Earth's crust. Below provides just enough warmth to keep it from freezing solid, despite surface temperatures, at the research station above regularly falling below -60 degrees Celsius. The drilling project took decades, and the caution behind it is worth understanding. Russian researchers began drilling at Vostok back in the 1970s, originally to study Earth's past climate through air bubbles trapped in ancient ice. Only as drilling approached nearly 4 kilometers deep did scientists realize they were closing in on an enormous hidden lake. At that point, the project changed entirely. Breaking through carelessly risked contaminating water sealed away for millions of years. So researchers developed new techniques to detect the exact moment the drill approached the surface and sealed the borehole immediately, letting lake water rise under its own pressure rather than letting drilling fluid sink down into it. When Russian scientists finally drilled through to the lake's surface in 2012, they retrieved ice cores containing traces of microbial life. The findings remain debated, since distinguishing native lake organisms from possible drilling contamination is an extraordinarily difficult problem. But the broader implication that isolated sunless environments sealed beneath kilometers of ice can potentially sustain biological activity connects Lake Vostok to the same astrobiological questions raised by Europa and Enceladus, moons believed to hold subsurface oceans beneath equally thick ice shells. Scientists studying Lake Vostok describe it as one of the closest analogs on Earth for what a sealed subsurface ocean elsewhere in the solar system might actually look like. Not a metaphor, a working model that space agencies study specifically because it might tell us something about environments we cannot yet reach anywhere else. And Vostok is not alone down there. Subsequent radar surveys have identified over 400 subglacial lakes scattered beneath the Antarctic ice sheet, connected in some cases by vast, still poorly understood systems of subglacial rivers, an entire hidden hydrological network flowing beneath the ice, largely unmapped, largely unexplored, existing in near total isolation from the world above it. There is one more feature buried beneath this ice that deserves a moment, because it holds a record most people have never heard of. Beneath the Denman Glacier in East Antarctica sits the deepest point on land anywhere on the planet, a canyon carved into bedrock that plunges roughly 3.5 kilometers below sea level, deeper below sea level than Death Valley sits above it, in the opposite direction. Scientists only confirmed the true depth of this trench through satellite and radar surveys completed within the last decade. We are still actively discovering the fundamental shape of this continent's hidden landscape using tools that did not exist when most people currently reading a headline about an ice wall were born. Here's what I keep coming back to when I think about this continent. The theory says the edge of Antarctica is being hidden from us, that something enormous and consequential is being kept out of view behind a wall nobody is allowed to approach. The actual, verified, extensively documented truth is stranger than that, and in a completely different direction. Nothing at the edge is being hidden. Ships photograph the ice shelves regularly. Satellites map every kilometer of coastline in the detail, precise enough to track individual icebergs as they calve and drift. The wall people describe is real, and it has been measured down to the meter. What is genuinely hidden, what remained completely unknown to every human being who has ever lived until the tools to detect it finally existed, is not at the edge at all. It is underneath. An entire mountain range on the scale of the Alps, buried and preserved beneath ice for millions of years. A lake larger than some countries, sealed away from sunlight and atmosphere since a period before our species existed, potentially harboring life we are only just beginning to carefully investigate. A network of hundreds more lakes and rivers threading beneath the ice sheet, largely unexplored even now. We did not need a conspiracy to explain why so few people have seen the true landscape of Antarctica. We simply did not have radar technology capable of looking through kilometers of solid ice until the second half of the 20th century. The concealment was never institutional. It was physical, frozen water, meters upon meters of it, sitting directly on top of a landscape that had been waiting there the entire time. I think about that distinction more than I probably should. The instinct to look for a hidden truth is not a bad instinct. It is, in a lot of ways, the same instinct that drives good science. The difference is where you look. The theory sends people's attention outward, toward the horizon, toward a wall that photographs and satellite images have already thoroughly documented. The actual mystery was always pointed the other direction, down, through kilometers of ice that took decades of careful, patient, unglamorous radar work to finally see through. Antarctica does not need an invented wall to be one of the strangest places on this planet. It already is one, once you know where to actually look. Part of why the ice wall theory spreads so easily is that the real explanation requires patience. It requires sitting with the idea that something can be well documented and still almost entirely unfamiliar, simply because nobody had a reason to teach it to you in school. The Antarctic Treaty has been publicly available in full text since 1959. The Ross Ice Shelf has been mapped and photographed for decades. The Gamburtsev Mountains and Lake Vostok have both been the subject of published, peer-reviewed research for years. None of this was hidden from you. It was simply sitting in scientific literature rather than in the kind of short, dramatic video that travels fastest online. There is still no permanent population there, and there likely never will be one in any conventional sense. The Antarctic Treaty is still in force. The ice shelves are still there, still visible, still photographed constantly. And beneath all of it, a mountain range nobody has ever climbed. A canyon deeper than any gorge on land anywhere else on Earth. And a lake nobody has ever truly seen. Still sit in the dark, exactly where they have been for millions of years, waiting for whatever comes next and how carefully we choose to look. The surface is not the whole story. It never was. If this documentary gave you something you did not have before you pressed play, if Antarctica feels like a different place to you now than it did 20 minutes ago, then subscribe to Abyss Files. Every week, we go somewhere the surface does not show you. Every week there is something the ocean, or in this case the ice above it, is still hiding. And I promise you, it only gets stranger from here.